investment restrictions for Americans abroad. Now, before explaining what these restrictions could be once you leave the US, I need to explain first of all how it works whilst you are still a US resident, because that will give you a bit of context as to why these problems arise. So if you're living in the US and you've got your money sitting with a US custodian, this US custodian is only going to give you access to US domicile funds, US domicile ETFs, and direct shares or direct bonds, which are based anywhere around the world. But the key thing to focus on here is the funds that are US domiciled, or the ETFs that are US domiciled. And the reason they don't give you access to funds or ETFs outside the US is because these are classed as what they call PFIC. So PFIC stands for Passive Foreign Investment Company. And if you did buy a fund or an ETF that wasn't US domiciled, you would end up paying ordinary tax on the gains, plus other penalties may arise as well, depending on how long you hold these for. So comparing ordinary tax rates versus capital gains tax, no one's going to want to end up paying more tax, which means that US custodians don't give these as an option. And you wouldn't want to buy them if they were an option anyway. So that's how it works in the US. Once you leave the US though, there are restrictions on buying US domicile funds or ETFs. So let's just say, for example, you've moved to Europe. This same US custodian could now restrict you to not buying US domicile funds and ETFs. And also they won't allow you to buy non-US domicile funds or ETFs, which means you cannot buy any type of fund or ETF at all. And let's just say you contacted a bank or an institution that's outside of the US, they're not going to be able to offer this either because, or they may be able to, but there are very few that do offer this because it increases the reporting that these custodians have to do, and it also can be detrimental to non-US citizens. So if you take me as an example, I'm from the UK. If I had all of my money sitting in US funds and ETFs, I may be liable to US estate taxes on a value of more than $60,000. Now this does depend on the US tax treaty, but I could end up paying a huge amount of tax, and if there isn't a treaty that covers the US with the country where I'm living, which a lot of times for estate taxes there isn't, then I could end up paying tax twice. So it's really, really restrictive. So basically you are very rarely going to be able to buy a US domicile fund or a US domicile ETF outside of America. And that then means you're restricted to creating a portfolio based on direct shares or direct bonds. And you can buy these anywhere in the world. So if you wanted to buy, for example, a German stock or an Italian bond, or you wanted to buy a corporate bonds from Hong Kong or whatever, you can buy anything because it isn't within the structure of a fund or an ETF. But if you're trying to create a portfolio for yourself, even if you are a professional, it's very, very difficult to do because you want to make sure the portfolio, first of all, diversified. So you've got a mix of US and international stocks and bonds. So let's just say you've got a minimum of 50 different holdings. It's not a case of buy and hold like you can do with a fund or an ETF, or which is tracking, for example, an index like the S&P 500 or the MSCI World. You have to know when to take profit. And that's very difficult to do with multiple different holdings. It's even difficult to do for professionals. And that's why, for example, mutual funds, they do it as a full-time job, or for example, if you're buying an active ETF. So it means either you have the time and capacity to do it, or you pass it on to a professional that can do it. And us as a company, it's not a case of, right, it's black and white, we use this provider, we use this portfolio in this country. Every country has a restricted list as well. And that restricted list gets updated every single week, every single month. Sometimes we even have to call up the custodian just to double check because their website may not even be up to date enough based on changes that have just happened. It happened to me about 6 months ago where we set up an account and the website was incorrect, and we were more restricted on what the client could buy, and we ended up having to change a custodian. So every country will have these updates on a regular basis. Sometimes the changes are good, a lot of times it ends up with more restrictions, but what you want to be able to do is be able to create a portfolio which is going to be compliant wherever you go. And once it's set up, we're pretty much good to go. And what you want to do is you want to be able to do this as early as possible. So let's say you haven't left the US yet. It's best to plan and get things set up more than 90 days in advance, because there can sometimes be restrictions on having accounts set up depending on where you're going as well. But if you get this set up and the country where you're going does allow existing accounts, those accounts have to be open for more than 90 days. So many caveats. Very difficult to sometimes run through this on a very short video, but if you do want to find out information about either the country where you're living or the country where you're going, please reach out to us and we can provide you with more information.